But we're glad to have everybody. We do have a chat. I have it open, so if you want to add anything in the chat, I can bring that up as we go as well. But otherwise, Sue, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to say welcome everybody. We're excited. This is our first foray into virtual books and authors. We're so disappointed we haven't been able to do it in person, and we're excited that we can do it on this format because actually we can reach people all over the country if we can get the word out. You don't have to be from Starkville. You don't have to be a member of Friends of the Library. You know, it's open to everybody. So we hope to expand our audience quite a bit through this format. When we first started talking about it, I was talking with Philip Carter, and I think everybody here probably knows Philip, but I was going to give you a little introduction to him because he came on board at absolutely the most difficult time. He started in February 1st, and what hit in March? I mean, just the most horrible thing imaginable. With the pandemic, library had to close shortly into March or April, Philip, something along that time. So, and we're now open part-time. You know, I think most of you know we're open from Tuesday through Friday from 9 to 1, and we even have curbside service, so that's great. But I started talking to him about this, and he said it's a great idea, let's do it. And I said, well, Steve Robertson was actually scheduled for April, so we want him to be our first speaker. And we were all excited about him in the first place. But it turns out that Philip is a huge Mississippi State sports fan. He is also a huge Steve Robertson fan. So it was natural that I should say, well, hey, why don't you introduce Steve? And we've just been chatting a little bit here, and they're chatting like old friends. So you get to see Philip if you haven't met him before. He's a great guy. He's doing an incredible job under these difficult times. So Philip, I'm turning it over to you to do a formal introduction, somewhat formal, of Steve, and then we'll hear Steve.
All right. So I am Philip. So Steve, to give you a little background on Steve, even though I think this is probably unnecessary for most of the people in here, most everybody in the chat's going to be Starkville natives. Most of us are state fans, so most of us are familiar. But to give you an idea, I was previously at Lamar County. Steve is actually raised in Columbia, Mississippi. I would run into people all the time down in the Pine Belt who knew Steve. Robert St. John spoke well of you the couple of times I got to speak to him. But so I first got really acquainted with Steve when I started paying attention to college football recruiting. For a long time, I was just a Saturday fan of football. I didn't follow the news, didn't follow team happenings for years and years and years. I just cared about what happened on Saturday. But then as recruiting news started to pick up and it became a bigger media and a bigger thing, Steve and his work he does on Gene's page started to come across my various social media feeds. And then, of course, the book, the Flim Flam, got ready to come out, and started hearing you talk about it. And of course, I'm elbow deep in the rivalry. I pay attention to all that, and so it's fun. And so Steve was speaking in Hattiesburg after the release of Flim Flam, and so my wife and I decided to go over there to Main Street Books there in Hattiesburg and hear Steve speak. And the book is great. Hearing Steve speak is so much better. The way he talks about it, the way he talks about the rivalry, very no nonsense, very just tells it like it is. It was really funny, Steve. I'll tell you as I'm introducing you that the fun story of I used to drive by the infamous Golden Corral every day on my way to and from Hattiesburg. I used to love that story. Every time we drove by it, we had to crack a joke about it. So if you don't know about the Golden Corral thing, you'll have to look that up later because that's a fun story. But so got into Flim Flam.
Let me just say, I don't think I've ever been in that Golden Corral.
Really?
It's so crazy. Like these people act like that I'm part of some clandestine secret society that's conspiring to bring down the University of Mississippi, and that we meet in a Golden Corral of all places. Like we couldn't even get an Applebee's or Bennigan's or something. They had to put us at a buffet. Like we're not cultured enough to order a la carte.
There's no secret skull and dog bone society that I don't know about yet.
Not that you're aware of.
Okay, gotcha. So yeah, I would drive by that Golden Crown. I just love how ludicrous that story was, and how it's the nature of that rivalry and how ridiculous it can get. So Steve wrote Flim Flam. Read that book. It's fantastic. I started a second read and then got interrupted by some other things. I need to go back and reread it again. But when I came to Starkville, I knew Steve had been doing some book talks and some lectures. Let's say lectures. They're basically lectures sometimes. But and I was like, so have we had Steve come speak here? And everybody was like, no. I was like, he lives in Starkville. It's been the #1 Mississippi book. We got to make this happen. So we started to make it happen. So for those of you who don't know, Steve Robertson has been covering Mississippi State sports for over 20 years. He's author now of 3 books. He hosts the Boneyard podcast on Mississippi State sports. If you don't follow that, you can find it anywhere you get your podcasts. Sure, he's going to talk about maybe. He's got another podcast in the works that I think is going to be fantastic. I'm really excited to tune into that one. His most recent book is Alpha Dawgs. This is the most recent one, right? I get this one still in my head. COVID brain start feeling crossing my brains. He brought us a copy that we're buying to put on our shelves. I did tell him that I could at least guarantee him 1 book sale. That was all I could promise in a Zoom meeting. And so he'll tell you where you can find all his books. But without any further ado in my ramblings, Steve Robertson.
Well, thanks first of all for Sue and Philip for having me here. This has been a long time coming, but this is the world we live in, and so I think this is a good format too for us to just kind of sit and visit virtually, and that way too people can go back later and watch it. Those that couldn't make it, and I'm happy to share it on my social media feeds too. But so when I got ready to move to Starkville back in 2014. One of the things I'd always wanted to do was tell the Mississippi State story, because Mississippi State has been so poorly represented in Mississippi's literary heritage. And so I said that when I get there, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to interview people, and I want to talk about, not just write articles, not just do podcasts, but I want to do something a little more substantial. And so after I wrote Flim Flam, and to back up even further, I was actually writing a book about recovery. I've been cleaning. If I make it to December 10th, it'll be 29 years, and there's a good chance that I'll make it. But I don't take anything for granted. So I was writing a book about recovery, and I didn't know what I was doing. Every writer aspires to write books, but I don't just say this because I've written 3 of them. But it's fun to start books. It's fun to plan books. It's fun to write them. It's not fun to finish them. It is a tremendous amount of work to finish a book. You got to do rewrites, and there's all this editing, and then by the end of the process, you're ready to kill everybody involved. I mean, it gets contentious at times, because you forget sometimes that everybody's trying to make the work better. But you start, for me, I'm such a baby about this, because my heart is in every single word in these books. And if anything is wrong, or if anything's misrepresented, it's my name on the book. And people aren't going to say, hey, well, this editor messed this up. They're going to say, hey, Steve Robertson doesn't know what he talks about. So I take that stuff real seriously. So in the middle of me writing this book about recovery, that I will probably not be able to use any of, because now that I know how to write books, I look back at that, there may be a few paragraphs I can cull out of there. But I had a publisher contact me and says, hey, listen, there's going to be multiple books written about this whole Ole Miss NCAA investigation thing. You've been ahead of all this, so you should write the book. And I guess it took me about a week to even respond, because I just wanted to kind of take it all in and decide, do I really want to deal with all this? Do I really want to go to the whole trouble of, making everybody mad? And I'm no problem with that. But at the end of the day, I just didn't know, was I good enough? Could I actually pull this off? Would somebody else be better off writing this story? And so I took a week to kind of take an inventory. And I said, no, I want to take this on, because I don't want somebody else to tell my story. I don't want somebody else that, because I was, to be honest with you, maybe it's ego or whatever, but I thought that somebody else would mess it up, or, leave too many things out and not tell the full truth. And for me, the reluctance of the in-state media to cover the story is a big part of the story, because it's their job to cover this. And they absolutely flat out refused to cover it. I offered them names, sources, everything. They would not take it. And the more I offered it, the more I realized there's something going on here. There is some reason these people are not wanting to follow their own mandate of their work. And so wrote the book. It was a huge hit. Never thought that it would get the result that it did. And I don't just mean book sales, but when I began writing that book, little did I know that, it would uncover arguably the greatest or largest sports scandal in Mississippi sports history. But other people have put that label on it. I can't really argue against it, even though it's my story. I don't know that we've ever had a sitting coach fired in a scandal like this, especially considering, you know, the way that he lived his life and then ultimately what came to be. But so when it got time for the second book, everybody wanted the sequel to Flim Flam. Everybody's like, "Oh, you got to tell this," because there's a lot of things that I held back, and if I had to do it over again, I would not have pulled any punches. So when I wrote it, and as proud as I am of Flim Flam, there was a little part of me that is a little unfulfilled because maybe I got a little coward in the moment, and I thought, well, maybe I don't need to go quite this far. If I had to do it over again, I would not pull any punches. I would put the pure, unadulterated truth, everything in there that I could possibly get in there, without the fear of litigation. And that was a big part of it too. That was kind of a driving fear of all that, is because you have to be right. Some of the people that were feeding me information, I don't know their intentions or their agenda. And so you take your time with that. And so I have talk to my lawyer and kind of found some common ground where I felt like we were safe. And so we put it out there, but everybody was waiting for the sequel. And so I started writing the sequel to Flim Flam. And I'll be honest with you, my heart just wasn't in it. I said, I need to let this breathe for a few years and let some more of this story come out before we revisit this. And so, but I was still under contract to write a book. And so I went to the publisher and I said, "Hey, listen, what if I did this? What if I called Jackie Sherrill and Ron Polk and John Bond and great Mississippi State sports heroes and interview them about the rivalry? Because I know my base. Okay. And listen, nobody loves more than, beating Ole Miss. But I said, what if I just, called these people and interviewed them? So let's workshop a couple chapters. And so I did. And it was so much fun. And so I put a wish list together of everybody I wanted to talk to. And I got on the phone. I said, listen, I'm writing this book about the State Ole Miss rivalry from a Mississippi State perspective, because every book written about the rivalry, other than Starkville and Alpha Dawgs, written by some Ole Miss guy, so I thought it was important for us to tell our side of things. And so I wrote Starkville, and it was one of the greatest joys of my life. And it was so well received. And so I had more people said, "Hey, you need to tell this story." And there's no shortage of great Mississippi State stories to tell. And so I purposely held out some big names thinking about subsequent books, because I didn't want to put everything in the first one. And so circle back around, I was thinking maybe late this year, next year. Well, so Alpha Dawgs is my quarantine project. I don't have any ball games to cover, press conferences to attend. So let's go ahead and attack this. And so I made my wish list together, I guess, in December, and started interviewing in February, and got all but 2 people on the wish list. Everybody knew the book and knew my work and knew me, and so it made it that much easier. I had 2 people that just weren't quite ready, or we just couldn't get the timing down. And so then we had time to edit the book even more. And so one of the things I'm most proud of with this one is not just the content, not just the stories, because you get a chance to interview Rafael Palmeiro one-on-one about why he chose Mississippi State and how much fun it was to be a Bulldog. That's one of the greatest experiences of my professional life. But because we had more time, we were real hard on the book, and which is difficult for me because I am such a baby when it comes to that sort of stuff. Because you take all that stuff personal. When you write it, it's your baby, and your life and blood is in every single word. And so when somebody is being critical of it, it's hard for me not to take that personal. But I think I grew up a little bit, because I went back to my publisher and I said, "Hey, listen, let's all kind of see what do we feel are the 3 weakest chapters. I mean, the stories are good, but what can we do to beef these chapters up?" And so we did that. And then it was funny, of the 3 we voted on, I think 2 of them were consistently picked. And so we went back. So we ended up fixing all of them, not just the ones that I thought were the weakest, but all those 2. And then we went back and said, okay, let's take the 3 best chapters and let's be hypercritical of them. I mean, how do we make them better? And then we did that. And so I had probably an extra month to work on rewrites. And it's a wonder I have any hair left, even though I have so much of it. But I was so ready to be done. I remember talking to my publisher. I said, "Man, I'm beginning to correct corrections now. I think it's time for us to kind of do a final read and finish this thing." And then you wait. And it's so funny because by the time the book gets printed and gets on the shelf, in my mind, I've already moved on. Like I'm already working on the next stuff. Like I've got a book of poetry that's going to come out in the spring. And people are like, "Hey, I'm so excited about your new book." And I said, "Oh yeah, it'll be out in the spring." And you kind of forget, you put so much time and effort into it. But of all the things that I've written, I'm so incredibly proud of all of them. But I'm probably most proud of this one because I really think I grew as a writer and really opened myself up to some more constructive criticism, which is, I think to me, when you get to your third book, to me, I think that really establishes you as a writer because anybody can get lucky once. And that's what you tell yourself. Like I remember talking to some friends that are so much more successful than me after Flim Flam. I said, man, have I already peaked as a writer? I'm never going to have a story this big or this kind of, national appeal. If I already peaked. And one of my dear friends said, now that you're here, it's not about peaking. It's about staying here. Now that you're relevant, you got to stay relevant. And that helped me because when I began to think about these other projects, I said, I don't want Flim Flam to be like this big thing that I can never hit again. I believe I've still got my a time to kill to write. I haven't done any fiction yet, but I believe I've got some big books left in me, and I'm really excited about what's to come.
Awesome. That was actually something that I thought about while you were talking. It's like, did you have any fiction that you're thinking about writing? Is that something you even want to get into? Some people are like, no, nonfiction, that's my thing. I tell people all the time I'm a terrible librarian because most librarians are really hyper tuned into fiction, and I'm a nonfiction reader. So it ends up being fun conversations when like, oh, have you seen the new book by so and so? And I'm like, no, haven't seen that at all. But have you read this new biography, or have you read this new I don't know, business practice books? And I'm the most boring librarian, obviously. But is fiction a thing you thinking about doing?
Well, maybe someday. I hate writing dialogue for one. So that's probably another reason why I should probably do it, because you want to be more rounded as a writer. But, I'm a firm believer in you should embrace the things that scare you as a writer, because it's easy to get in your comfort zone. And I think when you continue to kind of churn out cookie cutter stuff, I think that gets boring after a while. But right now, the 3 book plan, and it's so crazy that I have a 3 book plan, but so next year, the plan is to have the book of poetry out. You drop something, it's right there. Uh, you had the book of poetry come out, and I'm going to finish that probably in December. And Mike Shelton's kind of a local celebrity here too, and he was former Mississippi Poet of the Year. He's kind of been a mentor to me, and uh, he has really challenged me. And so that was kind of my first love as a writer anyway. It was poetry and songwriting, that sort of stuff. And so we'll put that out, and then I'm going to get back to the book of recovery. We've got a couple of things that we're kind of negotiating, there's some other things that may come through turn of the year. If they don't, I'm going to go back and try to finish the book of recovery. I don't know if that's released next year or early 2022. And then back in 2022, we'll do the 3rd Mississippi State book. And I've already got a list of people. I've got so many people left. I still haven't interviewed Will Clark or Don Smith, and there are many others like that. There's some other people that, and there's some people that are getting up in age too. And one thing that I'd be remiss without saying is that, I wrote about this in Starkville in an introduction. I never got a chance to interview Stan Black, and he died tragically at such a young age. And I remember talking to Stratton Caratasis about this whenever we got ready to put Starkvilleans together. I said, I need great stories. I don't care where they come from, what they're about. I need great stories. I guess because some of our Bulldog heroes are dying off, and when they're gone, their memories and stories go with them. And some of my favorite stories, and it's so great when I see the college kids around campus, we'll be at Duty Noble or something, and some 19-year-old sorority girl will come up and say, "Hey, I just finished your book, Starkvilleans," and I'm like, "Oh, what was your favorite chapter?" And I said, "Well, I really like the one about the Delta Maroon Barons, about the guys that flew over to Ole Miss in 1946 and poured maroon paint in the bleachers, and you know." And I'm thinking, this guy, Frank Corolla, is in his 90s. And he was a 19-year-old college student from Leland, Mississippi. And now here, some modern day, sorority girl is celebrating that blow against Ole Miss in the rivalry. And those things are fun. I think the student stories are incredible because those are stories that haven't been told very often. Like, and also with, we had a couple of students steal the golden egg, and it went on a wild ride. And so those are the things that I think add some color to the Mississippi State story. And so I look forward to telling more of that. But next year I'm kind of looking forward to kind of taking a break from the Mississippi State stuff and kind of expounding and expanding my repertoire a little bit as a writer. And this poetry stuff, I really, it's for myself. It's not a vanity project, but I've got all this stuff that's just accumulated over the years, and I just want to have somewhere to kind of put it and kind of get it done and kind of get it out of my system. And it'll be nice too to kind of have some of that. Some of it dates back to when I first got clean and sober, and so I'll work with some of that stuff. But it's important to me because I think poetry is so cathartic. And as much as I love writing, there are a lot of times I'll get on Facebook and I post what's called the randoms, as you're aware, and a lot of them are recovery based, but a lot of it's just kind of what's on my heart, and I speak from the heart. And my sister keeps telling me, you need to publish a book of randoms. People would love that. I don't know if that ever happens, but I have just found that I heal by communicating in the written word. And so that's an important part of the process for me. And I think poetry is a big part of that.
As a musician myself and a songwriter, a bad one, but a songwriter nonetheless. I think there's something to be said for that. I went through a poetry phase when I was in high school and in college, and I took some fiction writing workshop classes. Um, and writing songs, I find, is really, like you said, cathartic in the same way that poetry is, because you don't have to follow the usual flow of a story. I'd write short stories, or I'd write some slightly longer works, but where you got to have, a beginning, you build up to something where you fall off at the end. With a song or poetry, you get to just sort of express an emotion. And sometimes that's just using words that you would have never normally put in order in any spoken word or in a fiction work or regular prose work. It allows you to just sort of express. And so you get that off your chest. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, one of the things too is what I love about poetry is you can be a little cryptic. I mean, you can put your authentic feelings out there and kind of word it in a way where you're not necessarily transparent. And, but it still serves the same purpose. I mean, it's like if I want to go on Facebook and say, hey, listen, I am unhappy with you, that's just going to lead to more drama. But I could go write something a little more cryptic and make it beautiful, and it allows you to deal with the emotion rather than having to deal with the conflict sometimes. And so and maybe that's the coward's way out. But for me, I've even written about some of my exes. Not that I have any romantic interest in them whatsoever, but it's kind of helped me kind of, I didn't know that I was bleeding until I picked up a Band-Aid, and so, yeah, some of the rhymes that I come up with, I kind of laugh to myself. And, I had some bad relationships over the years, but I'll tell you that the central figure in all of us were me, because they just weren't the right ones. But there's one in particular I wrote a rhyme about that I'll finally, I'll put a poem around this, but I laugh when I say it. Other people laugh, and some people think it's kind of an insult, but it basically goes that, she wore silver jewelry and fashioned herself as a bit of a hippie. She claimed to be a citizen of the world, but she had never left Mississippi. And so I dated a bunch of people like that. She had all the classic rock records, but didn't know any of the songs. She focused on all her rights and every one of my wrongs. And so that, to me, that's where the beauty and all that comes from, is I can take that and kind of make something playful and fun from that. But it also too allows you to kind of reconcile any of that. I've got it. I owe nobody anything. But I think that writing for me allows me to kind of, resolve those things that are maybe kind of floating around in the subconscious. And I have a lot of fun with it, even if I never publish it. And I think writing for the sake of writing for me, and I've said many times, I think the best stuff I've ever written, nobody else will ever read, just because you write things for yourself. You write what's on your heart and in your head. And I think that's the real value in writing.
Absolutely. It gives you a chance to actually voice things and just get them out. And then if other people happen to gravitate to them, that's, it's even better. It means you've struck a common chord with other people, and other people are feeling it.
And let me, along those lines too, I think there is poetry and even stuff that's kind of prose. People are looking for authenticity and commonality. And so when you go read those things, just, what, I felt that way too, or I've been there. And that's one of the things that's so about recovery is that, the disease of addiction robs you of community. It makes you feel that you're ostracized and that nobody could ever love you and that nobody understands you. And I have been there. And I have been there at times, even when I was completely sober. But the bottom line is, when you read these things, and I think that's one of the reasons that people respond to the randoms the way they do, is you read that stuff and you say, you know what, I feel that way. And all of a sudden, I don't feel so alone because there's this other person that has dealt with it and experienced it. And you talk about the podcast. Today is the very first episode I did before I came up here. It's been on my mind. I almost feel like I'm off the hook now because I've done it, because, I've been clean and sober so long. I almost feel a responsibility at times to kind of share some experience, strength, and hope. But it's called I Am Steve R, and we'll get distribution worked out to get it on iTunes and everything else. But it's on all my social media right now. But it's one of the things I talked about today. It's like, you get so caught up in your own demise, you think that nobody could ever love you. And when I got ready to reach out for help, I thought that I was like, I always tell people when I speak, I was so far away from where I needed to be as a person that any step I took was in the right direction. And I used to think that I was out there on an island, but when I got ready to reach for help, I thought all my people were going to be beyond arm's length. But as soon as I began to reach a little bit, there was just an army of people grabbing for my hand to pull me out. They're just waiting for me to make the move. And so I think it's important to share those experiences because, when I got clean and sober at such a young age, I walk in, it's like, people 3 times my age. And I think it's important that young people see that we can and do recover. And this is the best version of me there ever has been. This is the coolest me I've ever been, and I'm completely clean and sober. And I used to think that I couldn't be cool. I couldn't be fun, without drugs and alcohol. And I have learned a new way to live. And I think it's important to share that knowledge with other people. But, none of this stuff happens. Flim Flam doesn't happen. None of these books happen. And that's the thing, when I get back to Flim Flam, and I had some people in recovery contact me, about, just telling the truth, because in many ways I was kind of untouchable in that, the cancel culture couldn't get to me. And so I just told the truth. And my lawyer, Casey Lott, out of Boonville, if you're looking for a lawyer, he's great. Love you, Casey. But we took all this to court for those documents. And Casey said, when talking to the Ole Miss lawyers, they were talking about, oh, Steve's so over the top and he claims this and he claims that. And Casey said, here's the thing. All Steve did was tell the truth. It's your people's denials that made him a cult hero. And I don't know that I could have said that any better, because that's all that I tried to do. And if you tell the truth, like my dad used to always tell me, if you tell the truth, you never have to remember how you told it.
And that's a really important point. As long as what you're saying is factual based, and I've watched it on social media, not only on Facebook to a lesser extent, because sort of on Facebook you get to sort of curate the group around you if you need to, and we all have had to. But on Twitter, especially, where unless you decide to lock your Twitter account down, you're subject to the whims and whimsy of everyone. And I've seen that, and you handle it very well. People try to come at you or say something like that, and you've never hidden anything. You've always been very upfront about everything. And just in case it wasn't clear, because I did allude to it, what Steve is talking about is a podcast on recovery that he recorded before he got here. I think that was clear, but I want to make sure we just state it blatantly. That I'm really excited about hearing. I've never had to go through that, but I have close family members who have gone through that, and I've seen their struggles and how hard it is. And do you think that part you're talking about, the outreach of support, and we're obviously deviating a little off books here for a second, though, but I find this interesting about Mississippi, as someone who's born and raised in Mississippi and moved away at one point and convinced myself I wasn't moving back to Mississippi. I sort of had to grow up and accept a few things about this wonderful state that we live in. Do you think some of that is not only the people in your life that were around you that loved you and cared about you, but also just the caring nature of Mississippians in general?
Well, partially. That's one of the things that I always joke about, is like, a lot of these people, they're so critical of me. The only weapon they have against me, I handed to them freely. And that was that, hey, I was a 19-year-old drug addict. I was a criminal. I did all these things, but I've recovered from that. And so people want to browbeat me with that. I've paid my debt, and I've made good with my life. And so I am so far beyond their reach that they cannot see me to touch me. But what worries me is what about the still suffering addict that's thinking, well, listen, if they'll say this about him with all that he's done, I don't need to be open and transparent about my own problems. And so it's one of the things too, one of the detriments and hindrances to recovery in the state of Mississippi sometimes too, and it's not just germane to Mississippi, is there are certain things we just don't want to talk about. And I challenge people, listen, if something goes wrong on your life, you need to perform an autopsy, because you don't want to have to repeat the behavior. And so, when I first got clean and sober, I've never been anonymous. And what I mean by that is people's like, well, you got everybody in my family. Once I got in trouble, once somebody said, oh, I heard about Steve. Oh, he's going to rehab, but he's going to treatment. He's doing this, and so, and not that I ever wanted to be anonymous. I earned all that rightly. And so I've never shied away from it. I think it's important to be honest, but there are a lot of people out there, they don't understand the addict in their life. They're being detrimental to their recovery by not talking about it. And had I not had some people be honest with me and say, hey, listen, and my favorite aunt, and it broke my heart at the time, and I still get emotional thinking about it. She called me after I had, I'd already been arrested, and she calls me and she says, I've never had any children, and you were the only child I'll ever have. You were the most like me, but you have nearly killed my parents, and I am not going to sacrifice them for you. That's a very sobering reality, but I had to hear that in order to recover. And so I applaud the people in my life that loved me enough to tell me the truth. And I think that's the important part of recovery is that I have to be honest, but I need everybody else to be honest with me. And that's what happened. I think that's what really kind of woke me up a little bit, because it's so easy. It's like, it's so much easier to kind of give them the $100 to kind of keep the peace and keep drama beaten down. But, nothing worth having ever comes easy in life. But I tell people all the time, don't ever surrender people you love to drugs and alcohol. Don't do it.
So as we're starting to wrap up here, I say wrap up. We've still got some time, but I want to make sure that I give some time for some questions.
Sure.
I know we've only got a few. We don't have too many people tuned in live, but I wanted to give everybody that is here a chance if they have any questions for you before we deviate. And I feel like we could talk all day on a bunch of different subjects. You haven't even got us on music yet, so we're gonna talk about. I'm not even bring up music we were talking about earlier on this this talk. But does anybody have any questions for Steve? You can either type them in, or if you want to ask them, you can. I ask that you unmute yourself, but remember to mute yourself again after.
I have a question, Steve. This is Julia Hodges. I'm up there somewhere on the
I see you
on the picture. Hey,
blonde hair.
Yes. You said that the journalists, and I think you were probably talking about primarily in Mississippi, but I'm not sure, that they were not covering the Ole Miss story. And when you would provide information to them and so forth, they weren't interested in covering it. And I wondered if you'd comment on that. What do you think motivated that?
Advertising dollars. I think at the end of the day, that's what it was about. And I've had some former employees of the Clarion Ledger that I spoke to that would not go on the record, that said, when there would be a story that would come out that was somewhat unflattering to Ole Miss, and they'd talk about it in a meeting, then somebody would come later and say, hey, I think maybe let's play up this angle of things. And, it's like, I think it's a different group now. So I'm not trying to cast aspersions at this current group of the Clarion Ledger. I think they've changed a lot, but I think they were reluctant to cover the story because they didn't want to deal with the fallout, and they want to deal with advertisers. Listen, I have had major corporations in the state of Mississippi contact radio shows and say, if you have him back on, we're going to pull our advertising. And we've had book signings canceled, and I laugh at all that. I think, all I did was tell the truth. It's not like I made this thing up. It's not like, and in the end, we had the shirts printed. Rose Bowl was right. And that was kind of a way to throw it back in their face. But, I think that's a sad day in journalism, not just in our state, but nationally, when we're going to be reluctant to tell the truth because we feel like we're at the mercy of an advertiser. And that's what happened. And I think at the end of the day, I'm really grateful to the Clarion Ledger and all the people involved that were so reluctant to cover the story, because without them, I probably wouldn't have ever gotten a book deal, And so in the end, it worked out good for me. So Hugh Kellenberger and those guys, thank you very much.
All right. Any other questions?
How do I unmute? Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, you had some really funny stories in Starkville. There was one about John Bond. Can you tell that story about what he did in a football game after, I think on the sideline, they were somebody was jumping on him and beating him up or something?
I think you're talking about when John got hit out of bounds, and
Right.
somebody had some curse words to say, that is not uncommon on college football sidelines. And I think it's been a while since I wrote that, but it had kind of been brewing for a while. And finally somebody said it, and John threw the football and hit the guy in the face with it. And and so the referee went over there and just asked for the football. Everybody on the Ole Miss sidelines was wanting John ejected from the game, but the referee just said, I didn't see anything, can I have the football? Because he had heard it all day too. And so, and that's the joy of writing those stories, is to hear those behind the scenes and in the huddle stuff. And I'll tell you about that John Bond chapter too. It's like, I told JB, I said, listen, you played in 4 Egg Bowls, but the only ones everybody wants to talk about are 2 you lost. Let's talk about the 2 you won too. So he talked about all 4 Egg Bowls, but the one in '83, the blown back game, he says that they're heading down the field and we're fixing to go have the game winning score, and their tornado sirens are going off. And he goes, and some of the guys are saying, John, what's that noise? He goes, y'all don't worry about that. Let's move the football. Let's go get an end zone. We won't worry about the sirens later. But JB, when I was a kid, my very first game I attended was November 1st, 1980. I saw Mississippi State beat Alabama as an 8-year-old kid. And so John Bond was my hero. It's like when I was a kid, I wanted to be John Bond. I wanted to wear number 13. I wanted to have long hair like he did. John Bond was the greatest. And John Bond is still the greatest. And it's just remarkable to me that I have his phone number and I can text him, and he's got me saved in his phone. So like 8-year-old me would not believe this moment, that I've had a chance to John Bond's become my friend. And that's the thing we talk about all the time. You're like, well, we've got a great fan base, but it really is a family. And, some people kind of come and go, depends on our wins and losses. But, there's a core group of people that they have taken on the Mississippi State identity, and John Bond is one of them. And having a chance to interview John, to me, was almost like interviewing Clark or Palmero, because when I was a kid, John Bond was just larger than life. He was the greatest.
And just to add to the John Bond story, so I was born on December 7th, 1980. And so I didn't get to experience the Alabama win. The only wins against Alabama I'm familiar with are the ones during the Croom era. But growing up, my dad was a State fan. My mom was a State fan. I have pictures of me crawling around on the floor at 9 months old with a Mississippi State t-shirt on. So I heard tons about John Bond growing up. Now, I've not had the chance to meet John Bond yet. I'm gonna rectify that at some point or another. I've had some Twitter interactions with him, but I may have to hook you up with this contact just for the fun stories, because I'm good friends with a close member of his family. I didn't find out that she was a member of his family until long into our friendship. And so I've heard some pretty fun stories that are post Mississippi State that are pretty interesting. But I want to meet John. I've tried to make that happen a couple of times, but it hasn't happened yet. Any other questions?
I was lucky enough to teach John Bond. I taught him 2 courses, and he was delightful. And I was also lucky enough to be at that Alabama Mississippi State game that we won 6-3. And I've got chill bumps now thinking about it. I've never seen anything so thrilling in my life. I mean, they were at the goal line about to score when we stopped them at the end. And it was just, there were women there that didn't really like football. There was a lady sitting down from us knitting, not looking at the game. The game went on. She put her knitting in. She started watching the game. It was the most thrilling thing I've ever seen. It was wonderful. And I knew several of those guys playing, so it was especially special to me. It was great.
Absolutely. So anybody else got questions?
We can talk about anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk about hair care tips, whatever. Writing.
Another story, Steve, that you told was about the kidnapping of a bully.
Yep. My favorite part of that chapter, and it's one of those things too. There's so many of those great stories out there, but it's they believe that it was the cousins of Molly Halbert that kidnapped Bully, and of course the painted him red and blue, and it was lead-based paint, and he got sick. And their excuse was that he was already sick. He wouldn't have died because they painted him. A typical Ole Miss spin, right? But the best part of that chapter to me is we're talking about life and times at Mississippi State. And back in those days, most of the girls went to the W. I think there may have been 100 female students at Mississippi State at the time. So if you wanted a date, you had to go to Columbus. And it wasn't like today. Back in those days, you courted girls. And so if you missed a weekend going over there courting, you'd lose your place in the pecking order. And so one particular weekend, the Tom Bigby River flooded and 82 was kind of washed out. You couldn't get to Columbus. So these guys went out to Potts Airstrip and they hired a plane and they flew over to Columbus and went to the air base and they took a cab to campus. And he said, Steve, we romance women to the window, went to the river, went down. And I thought, anytime that you young guys think that you're ladies' men, until you have hired an airplane and flown to see that girl, you got nothing on these cats from the 1950s.
No, they're serious. That's a totally different level of commitment.
Yeah, today guys are sliding in girls' DMs saying, hey, what's up? And these guys are hiring a plane. You know, I mean, you know, the poor ladies of today, I mean, like the gentlemen they have to deal with compared to the chivalry of these guys, you know, hiring a plane. But yeah, those are the things that excite me, because it's like you have to look at everything through the lens of the time. I mean, it really does. And that's one thing, even with Alpha Dawgs, and so many people have talked about the Game of Change chapter. One of the reasons that it was so important to me to write this chapter is there have been some stories written about the Game of Change, but they've never really been written by our people. And so I got a hold of Bill Anderton, who was on the team, and it was so great to be able to tell his side of the story, because, you know, he wasn't Joe Dan Gold, and he wasn't Leland, and he wasn't Drinker, you know, but he had a different vantage point. And I don't know that he's ever really been interviewed about it before. And so that was kind of cool. But I was at a book signing for Starkville ones, and I had a guy come up to me. I was in Mistletoe Marketplace in Jackson last year. And he goes, hey, Steve, listen, I got something I want to share with you. There's a big line of people. He waited. There was time. And he said, my dad was on the state college board. And he goes, you know, my mom died recently. And when I was cleaning out her house, I found this box upstairs, and it was all my dad's papers from when he was on the state college board. He goes, man, I've got all these documents in here and these letters and telegrams from people about the Game of Change. And I would like to make those available to you if you ever want to write about this. I said, what's funny, because the next book I'm writing, Game of Change. And so in this book, for the first time ever, there's telegrams from Ross Barnett. There's a letter from Henry Hederman of the Hederman Printing Company, Clarion Ledger. There is a letter from M.M. Roberts, whose name is on the stadium at Southern Miss. And then there's just kind of John Q. fan, male and female. And it was such a gift, because I think it's important for people to understand what these guys were dealing with. And I've said this on my show before. We need to have more of us to be more of them. And what I mean by that is these young people, and maybe it's the naivety of youth, but they did not know what they were coming home to when they got on that plane. They wanted to go play a game and represent Mississippi State and have a chance to compete for a national championship, because Bailey Howell was denied that right. And so they wanted to go play a game. They didn't know if they came back, if they were going to be arrested. They didn't know when they came back if they were going to be ostracized and unhireable in the state of Mississippi and given a scarlet letter due to the civil rights movement at the time. They did not know, but they got on the plane anyway. And how many times in our life, when we're faced with some consequences or some uncomfortable situations, that we just decide not to get on the plane? Well, I'm going to go get on the plane. And that's one of the reasons that Flim Flam got written. It's because I wasn't scared to get on the plane. And that's the thing, when I think about all those things in life that happen, it is inspiring to me to go back and have a chance to tell those stories and the words and the people that lived them, because there are lessons learned from all of that. It's not just history, you know, it's kind of guides for living. And I have so much respect for Dr. Dean Colvert and everybody involved with Mississippi State Athletics at the time. And at a book signing recently, just here a week ago, I had a guy come up to me. He said he was a student during the Game of Change times, and he was one of those people camped out on Dean Colvert's yard. And said Culver came out there and says, hey, I just want to tell you guys, you have been heard. And he said they all kind of knew. They kind of knew then what was about to happen. And then he said they had a pep rally before they left to go to the tournament, and only the second team guys came out. And he said, we knew something was up then, and we didn't know what. But it's so cool, because that's such an integral part of our history. And when you look at Mississippi State, every time there has been something to do with civil rights in the state, we have been on the right side of history. We truly are the People's University.
And that's a great story, because as someone who moved away from Mississippi and thought, well, I was going to stay away from Mississippi, coming back, because I'm a big believer in the phrase, well, you have to forgive the analogy, but you can't fix a sinking ship from the outside. leaving doesn't change anything. The Game of Change story is one that I tell to friends otherwise, other places that want to disparage Mississippi. And I'm like, you're not seeing the whole picture. You're seeing this very negative side of the story, but here's, even back then, here's the push to change that narrative, to be on the right side of history as it is. And so I love the story of that game. I'm really proud Mississippi State was the university that went that route and decided to get on the plane and do something different. So I love that story about Mississippi State and just Mississippi in general.
Well, I tell you what, probably my second favorite chapter in Alpha Dogs is the Alan McKean chapter. I've always been fascinated, why would we fire the winningest coach in school history, and so I did a ton of research. I read a ton of stuff out there, and a lot of it was wrong. But there wasn't a lot of information out there. And so I was so fortunate. I was able to get a hold of Harper Davis, who we recruited from an air base in Corpus Christi, Texas. And he agreed to come to Mississippi State on a Monday. He was in the car. We sent a coach to get him. And then they drove all day and night to get back. He gets to campus on Thursday, goes to the walk-through practice on Friday, and then scores 2 touchdowns on Saturday to beat Auburn. It's just a remarkable story. But we talked about the whole Alan McKean thing, and Alan McKean basically kind of put himself on an island. And we had Bob Sanders, who was a well-heeled booster out of Kosciuszko that was part of, fabric and, textile place. And back in those days, you didn't have the SEC network. You didn't have all this. So the university was very beholden to boosters. And Bob Sanders was the most prominent booster at the time, and he wanted McKean gone. And it took him a while to get him gone, but he got him gone. People thought that McKean's his offense was antiquated, and kind of some of the things we hear today. It's like sometimes it's best to learn from the history of the past. But I tell you, the coolest thing that I heard, and I wrote about this in the McKean story, is Alan McKean had already passed away, and his wife was basically on her deathbed, and Alan McKean was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame, and so they told her. They came to share with her that her husband, Coach McKean, had been inducted, and she died the next day. And so, being the poet that I am, I said, perhaps Mrs. McKean felt that good news was best delivered in person, and I get chills thinking about that. I mean, and it's like, there's a part of me too, that's it's satisfied, not just the need of curiosity, but there's an emotional attachment to all that sort of stuff. And it's kind of, once you kind of understand the lay of the land and you're able to kind of share this with the Mississippi State family, there's a satisfaction in being able to tell those stories that people are curious about.
It's awesome. And I have not yet gotten a chance to read Alpha Dog. So that's
shame on you.
I know. And I'm getting there. But I'm glad to know that Alan McKean story is in there, because that's something I've always wondered, looking back on those time periods, and everybody talks about the 41 team and those kinds of things. We do have time for one more question. If anybody has one.
Going once.
Yeah, going once, going twice. If not, we're going to wrap up. I want to thank Steve for coming today. Very different circumstances, using Zoom and using digital resources to do these kinds of things. I understand that authors do a lot of these talks because they need to sell books to keep writing books. So Steve, can you tell us where in Starkville everybody can buy your books?
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer. I want to get on my platform here a little bit here. I buy things on Amazon too when I can't buy them locally. And so after Flim Flam, I think we sold about 3,000 copies of the book on Amazon, but to the detriment of our Mississippi bookstores. And they never said it, but I saw it. Even though we did exceptionally well in the state of Mississippi, I began to think about, these are the people that have supported me. These are the people that got me started. And so I'm taking food out of their mouth. And so we elected as a group not to put Starkvilleans or Alpha Dogs on Amazon for that reason. Not that we're anti-Amazon, but we're pro-local. And so I want all of Mississippi's independent bookstores, whether they carry my books or not, to be successful, because we have a proud literary heritage, and our Mississippi bookstores are committed to Mississippi writers. And again, there's one big one that doesn't carry my books, and I'm okay with that. But I will say this about Square Books: when Flim Flam debuted at #1, they were the first people to call my publisher and congratulate me on having #1. And so they didn't carry the book, and that's okay. I want everybody to be successful. I want our Mississippi vendors, whether they be, retail or restaurants or bookstores, to be successful. And so I am a completely shop and eat local person. And I'm most Sundays during football season, I'm right down the street here at Book Mart and Cafe downtown. You can find my book at the Lodge, at Campus Book Mart, at Occasions Gift Store, at Maroon and Company, pretty much in Barnes and Noble on campus. Pretty much anywhere they sell books in Starkville, you can find it. And, we put a list together recently, and there's more vendors today carrying my books than ever before. And it means more than I can really express. I mean, it's like, when Flim Flam came out, there's this team of PR people calling these bookstores and saying, hey, listen, we got this guy that wrote this book, and they don't know me from Adam. I mean, they may know a little bit of my recruiting work, but it was kind of a hot topic. And so there were some people that took a chance on me. And I'll tell you, John Evans at Lemuria, I don't know that I have a better friend in the literary community than John Evans at Lemuria Books. And when all the heat got turned up, when it was a couple of people who, I'm not going to name their businesses because I don't want to give them any publicity. There are a couple people that backed out on me and did it in the worst way possible. And John Evans spoke up for me publicly and said, you know what, we believe that, and you're right as a consumer to buy whatever you want. And so I'm very loyal to John. And so if you're in that area, I tell you, John, it's so funny. When they were across the highway, when I was a kid in high school, we came on a field trip, and in my hometown, we had no bookstores and there was no Amazon. There was no internet. So we had to order the books to Lemuria Books in Jackson. And then we took a field trip to go take a field trip and then to go get our books. And I walked around that bookstore and I was like, this is amazing. Any book that you wanted, you could get there. And I thought then, I said, one of these days, I'm going to have a book in this store. And so I get a little emotional sometimes thinking about all this stuff, but I was there a couple of weeks ago and John and them were busy, but I went in and there's all three of my books on the shelf at Lemuria Books. And I told him that story and he goes, man, you're making me feel old. I said, man, you're making me feel important, and that's the thing. There's such a relationship between vendors. I don't take any of that stuff for granted. And so anytime somebody calls, Janet or the publisher, and they say, hey, we'd love Steve for coming, I'm going to come. If they can find a date, I'm going to go, because these people don't have to carry my books. They don't have to do anything for me, but they do. And it means more than I can ever say. And, all three of my books have been on the Mississippi bestseller list. And Alpha Dog's currently number 7. We'd love to get to number 1, but Grisham makes life awfully tough sometimes. But the fact there's so many other great writers out there that I didn't fully appreciate that bestseller list until I began to meet more of my contemporaries. And they're like, dude, you're always on the list. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I thought maybe there weren't a lot of books released in Mississippi, so I was just kind of getting by on luck,
Yeah.
But then when you meet other people and you understand that they would do anything to be on that list just once. And but that's not about me. That's about all of you. That's about other people that are supporting the work. And listen, I joke with Miss Carolyn Aberdeen at Bookmart. I said, I'm the Mississippi State guy living in Starkville, writing about Mississippi State. I should always be able to sell books up here. But we've done the math. We've sold books in all 50 states and Guam and Puerto Rico, and so it's like there's Mississippi State people everywhere. And it has been the joy of my life to be able to tell the Mississippi State story to Mississippi State people. And I'm really just getting started.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you're right. Of course, being in libraries, I see the Mississippi authors, the books they're putting out every year. And that's not even talking about, the big guns like John Grisham and Greg Isles and Ace Atkins over there in the other town. You've got a ton of folks putting out Mississippi books all the time. So getting on that Mississippi bestseller list isn't a matter of, oh, well, there were only 10 books put out this year by Mississippi authors. No, that's right. It's a big deal. It's a difficult market to get into. Well, that's what we got time for today. I'm going to, we're going to wrap this up. I appreciate all of you coming and attending. We hope this worked well for you. Give us some feedback. Let us know if you like this format. Hopefully we can do more books and authors this way. And be looking at not just the Friends of the Library, but the library itself. We're going to start doing some more digital content. I've got possibly a library podcast on the way. We're still figuring out the logistics of how that's going to work out. But watch our Facebook, watch our Friends of the Library Facebook. Please join. Y'all are all Friends members already looking at the list. But if you're not and you're watching this in the future, please look into joining our Friends of the Library. We have a new library website that went live yesterday. Please go check it out. Check out the Friends section. You can find the application there. You can also find a way to join digitally. We appreciate Steve coming, hanging out with me and all of y'all today, and look forward to doing it again in the future. Appreciate it.
Oh, may I say one more thing?
Sure.
So I want to give a plug for next month. We do already have somebody scheduled for December the 10th. We have a best-selling author, Miranda James, who is going to talk about his cozy cat mystery on December the 10th. So we're looking forward to that. And we hope to have one of these every month. So thanks so much, Steve. We really enjoyed it.
Be looking for the registration form for the Miranda James book talk. It'll be coming out here in the next few days or early next week. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me. And health state.
Health state.
Bye, y'all.